welcome back to Access. I'm Nicole.
I'm Ken.
And we are doing 1 Samuel this time.
Yay!
Yay. I gotta say, this is one of my favorite books in the Bible.
Yep.
It's just chock-a-block with great stories.
Chock-a-block?
I noticed that in each video, one of us uses some really random word.
And that is the random word. Chock-a-block is the secret word for this video. Whenever Nicole says chock-a-block, what should they do?
Yeah. That's what they used to do on Pee-wee's Playhouse.
So you're a fan of 1 Samuel. I'm a fan
am.
too.
Well, it's like all the great themes of the Bible are really in this book. And we got barrenness and the overcoming of barrenness, I should really say.
You have humor.
It's funny. You got drama.
You got death.
You got David and Goliath.
Yeah.
You got,
Not enough to kill a guy. You gotta cut his head off after you kill him.
After you kill him with a stone. Which makes me wonder, where did he get the sword?
Oh, well, and he had Saul's, but then he left it.
Yeah. I don't know. Probably just took Goliath as like ironic justice. But there's all sorts of really great things in 1 Samuel. But, you know what's not in 1 Samuel?
What's not in 1 Samuel, Nicole?
Clear authorship.
who have the authorship piece today.
I should say this for both 1 and 2 Samuel, since you'll get it in the next video too.
Exactly.
These two books should really kind of be treated as one. And also, we just don't really understand how they were put together. They're in that Deuteronomistic tradition that we keep talking about, which most of like the kingship chronicles are. But you know, that's all we really know. We think it was written in the late 8th century BCE. What's interesting about 1 and 2 Samuel, which makes them distinct, and also which I think throws text scholars for a loop, is the strong prophetic thrust in it, which is totally different from all the other Deuteronomistic books.
Which is not a bad segue into my piece, which we'll talk about, the historical context, what's going on. We talked about Judges in the book of Judges and a little bit of Joshua. Judge was this charismatic leadership position that was sort of religious leadership, military leadership, and God would raise up a judge, and then the judge would die, and there was a cycle of people kind of following the judge and then falling away. But a judge was not a king. A king is a very different kind of position. It's hereditary. God anoints this king. And what does anointing mean? It means actual literal oil being put on your head. Little sidebar here, the word Messiah. It's a good word. It comes from the Hebrew word Meshiach. Let's say it together. Meshiach. And it sounds messy. It's the sense of oil kind of running down over the head. It's what one does to anoint a king. The Greek cognate of Meshiach is Christos. So Jesus would be his first name. Christ is not his last name, friends. I know people kind of have that sense of Jesus, and they make it like Jesus H. Christ. I don't know where he gets the middle name from, but Christ is not his last name. It's a title. So Mel Gibson actually got that part right with
Jesus the Christ.
The Christ. He's correct on that one. It's about the only thing. Anyway. But it all goes back to this messianic tradition, or this kingship tradition, where Messiah simply means king. Now the difference between a king and a judge, what we see happen is a historical progression of leadership, where the judge kind of gets split into two parts as the kingdom grows up and needs more order, and especially civic and military order. And it's just too big for a charismatic ruler that you don't know if you have a judge and what the judge controls. So under this unified kind of kingdom type notion, you end up having a king who is anointed by God, and you cannot remove. There's no vote. There is some hereditariness, to this line. But whenever you then have a king, then you have somebody who can start to believe they are God. And for the Hebrews of all people, what an unstable kind of way to rule.
And in the larger context of the surrounding kingdoms, the kings were considered gods.
Yes,
very much.
absolutely.
Like, that's part of their culture.
Yeah.
So.
And so to have
Yeah.
a person who's calling themselves king, but then to very clearly know they are not a god,
Mhm.
certainly not the god,
Mhm.
what the Hebrews do, what kind of comes up spontaneously with the kingship, is the office of prophet.
Mhm.
And a prophet is someone not who foretells the future and
No.
what am I thinking, Nicole? It's not someone who divines into the future as much as someone who speaks truth to power.
Mhm.
So wherever there is a king, a strong king, you will always have a strong prophet.
Mhm.
And there's this dynamic relationship of kings will always want to overstretch and take too much for themselves,
Yeah.
and prophets will call
Reel
them
them
back.
back.
Exactly. So Nicole, what you want to talk about themes?
Yeah, the themes, like Ken just said, is all it's about this dynamic relationship between church and state, if we want to put them in modern terms, between prophet as representing the spiritual side, or the church, okay, and then the state represented by the king, and how do they coexist? How do they influence each other? Is there influence both ways? Yeah, it depends. But I think some other really important things that we didn't talk about beforehand, especially in 1 Samuel, would be the theme of friendship.
Oh, beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
David and
Like-
Jonathan.
Like for me, I think this is the first place where you really get this deep abiding sense of what friendship is. Because you have David and Jonathan, who should be enemies. Like they really should hate each other.
It's like Fox and the Hound.
Right.
Yeah.
It is.
Copper!
Yeah.
I have a 5-year-old.
Mhm. He is a 5-year-old.
My inner 5-year-old comes out.
Mhm. There is really no reason that they should be friends. And what you see is Jonathan as the best friend of David, who risks his life and even sacrifices his life for his friend.
Yeah.
And I think it's the first time you see friendship where it's not about not about family relationship. Like that's how it's different than Naomi and Ruth, who are friends.
Yes.
But there's some kind of social and legal kind of bonds that are between them too. Whereas this is just voluntary.
And they actually make covenant.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful moment.
It's beautiful. We're not going to talk about them as one of our stories.
Which Nicole's mad about.
I guess I am.
But we just did.
Yeah, well, you know what? Every chapter
Yeah.
in 1 Samuel is
chock-a-block.
is chock-a-block with awesomeness. And so we're going to start off with the call of Samuel, which is in chapter 3, but really read chapters 1 and 2, because I think those stories are better. But I do. But for the whole, to get a feeling of the book, chapter 3 is better than 1 and 2. And it's the call of Samuel, and it's super cute. Samuel's just this little kid. He lives at the temple because he's been dedicated to the temple by his mom Hannah. Again, go read chapter 2. And he hears this voice in the night saying, Samuel! Samuel! And he thinks it's Eli, who is the priest of the temple, kind of his caretaker. And he thinks that Eli's calling him. So he goes and wakes Eli up.
What do you want, boy?
Go away!
Out. Sleeping.
Go back to bed. So he goes back to bed. And then he hears, Samuel! Samuel! And he wakes up and kind of nudges Eli again. And gets the same response.
Go back to bed.
Happens a third time. All good things happen in threes in the Bible. It's a nice pattern. And it's at this time that Eli realizes that maybe the kid isn't delusional.